The sleek Bell 429 helicopter sat on the helipad of Harrison Tower, its polished surface reflecting the amber glow of the setting sun. 52 floors above the bustling city streets, the rooftop landing pad offered an unobstructed view of the skyline, a vista that Emma Harrison rarely took time to appreciate. Today was no exception. The CEO of Harrison Aerospace stood with arms crossed, her tailored charcoal suit jacket unbuttoned, a subtle concession to the exhaustion of a 14-hour negotiation that had finally concluded 20 minutes earlier. James Collins, her executive assistant, stood beside her, scrolling through his tablet. At 38, James possessed the polished appearance and calculated charm that had made him indispensable to Emma over the past decade. His perfectly tailored suit and meticulously maintained appearance betrayed not a hint of the day's strain. Emma's attention drifted to a figure at the edge of the helipad. A man in gray maintenance coveralls methodically cleaned scuff marks from the surface, his movements economical and precise. He worked with a quiet focus, seemingly oblivious to the CEO's presence. James followed her gaze, a smirk playing at the corner of his mouth. His voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper. "I bet he couldn't even find the ignition." Emma allowed a rare, amused smile to cross her lips. The day's brutal negotiations had left her mentally drained, and the prospect of a moment's diversion was oddly appealing. "Go on." James nudged, his voice carrying a hint of mischief. "It'll be funny." The maintenance worker continued his methodical, cleaning his back to them as he focused on his task. Something about his posture, a certain rigidity perhaps, suggested military training, though Emma couldn't say why that thought had crossed her mind. "You think so?" Emma asked, playing along despite herself. "I'll bet you $1,000 he doesn't know the first thing about a Bell 429. James whispered, confident amusement evident in his tone. "All right," Emma's voice carried across the windy rooftop as she strode toward the worker. "You." The man looked up, startled. Up close, Emma could see he was in his late 30s, with lines of fatigue around his eyes that spoke of hard-earned experience. His name badge read Wilson M. Emma pointed a perfectly manicured finger at her personal helicopter, its blades gleaming in the afternoon sun. "My assistant and I have a little wager. If you can fly this helicopter, I'll marry you." Wilson stared at her, then at the chopper, his expression unreadable. Behind her, James snickered, clearly anticipating the man's embarrassment. The janitor wiped his hands on a rag, walked past Emma without a word, and opened the pilot's side door. Emma's smile faltered. She exchanged a look with James, who simply shrugged, his own amusement growing. This was better than he'd hoped. The man would sit in the seat, push a few random buttons, and then get out defeated. It would make a perfect little story to tell at the executive bar later. But Wilson didn't just sit. His movements were fluid, economical, and unnervingly familiar. He strapped himself in with the practiced ease of someone who had done it thousands of times. His hands moved across the console, not with the fumbling curiosity of a novice, but with the precise touch of a surgeon. A sequence of switches flipped in perfect order. The low whine of the engine began to build a sound Emma knew intimately from her many flights. "What is he doing?" she murmured, her amusement evaporating, replaced by a sharp, cold spike of alarm. "He's bluffing," James said, though his voice now held a sliver of uncertainty. "There's no way." The whine of the turbine intensified, pitching higher until it became a deafening roar. The main rotor began to turn slowly at first, then faster, blurring into a transparent disk above the aircraft. The wind from the blades whipped Emma's hair across her face and forced James to take a step back. This wasn't a bluff. Before Emma could shout, before she could order him to stop, the helicopter lifted. There was no lurch, no wobble, just a perfectly smooth, vertical ascent of about 20 feet. It hung there for a moment, impossibly still, as if tethered to the sky by an invisible thread. Then it tilted forward and executed a flawless pirouette, the nose of the aircraft dipping in a gesture that felt almost like a bow. James's jaw hung open. Emma stood frozen, her mind struggling to reconcile the man who cleaned her office floors with the pilot executing a maneuver that her own highly paid aviator would have called showboating. The helicopter banked sharply, zipping out over the city skyline for a breathtaking moment before returning to hover directly over the helipad. With the same unnerving grace, it descended, touching down so gently that the landing skids barely made a sound. The engine began to spool down. The blades slowed. Silence, heavy and absolute, returned to the rooftop. The pilot's door opened and Wilson stepped out. He closed the door with a soft click. walked back to his cart, picked up his spray bottle, and resumed scrubbing the scuff mark on the floor. He didn't look at them. He didn't say a word. It was as if the last 90 seconds had never happened. Emma found her voice, though it came out as a strangled whisper. "Who are you?" The janitor. Mark Wilson finally looked up. His eyes were calm, but there was a deep, unyielding wall behind them. "Just the janitor, ma'am." He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. "Have a good evening." He pushed his cart toward the rooftop exit, the squeak of its wheels the only sound in the stunned silence. "Wait," Emma called out, taking a step after him, but he was already gone, the heavy steel door clicking shut behind him. James finally snapped out of his stupor. That That was impossible. He stammered, his usual composure shattered. "Who was that guy?" "Did you know he could do that?" "No, James, I did not." Emma's voice was ice, her mind racing. She ran a multi-billion-dollar corporation. She vetted everyone from her board members to her chefs. Surprises were liabilities, and she did not tolerate liabilities. Yet a man with the skills of an elite pilot was pushing a mop through her headquarters, and she knew nothing about him. Why, who was he hiding from? Her phone buzzed, dragging her back to reality. A message from the board's chairman. "Nakamura getting cold feet. Deal on life support. Fix it." Emma's jaw tightened. The deal with Nakamura Corp was everything. It would secure their dominance in the aerospace market for the next decade. Its collapse would be catastrophic, and James's reports had assured her everything was on track. She looked at the helicopter, then at the door where the janitor had disappeared. Two impossible problems had just landed on her desk in the same afternoon, and for the first time in a very long time, Emma Harrison had no idea which one to solve first. Emma stormed back into her penthouse office, the roar of the helicopter's blades still echoing in her ears. "Get me everything we have on Mark Wilson." Her voice was tight with an unfamiliar mix of anger and raw curiosity. "Employee file background check, security clearance, coffee preferences, everything." James, still looking a little pale, hurried to his terminal. "Right away, Emma." A few frantic keystrokes later, a file appeared on the large monitor on her wall. It was almost completely useless. Mark Wilson had been hired 8 months ago. His application was sparse. Address in a working-class neighborhood across town, previous employment listed as self-employed logistics and transport. No references. His background check had come back clean. No criminal record, no credit issues, nothing. He was on paper a ghost. A model employee with a perfect attendance record who had never caused a single issue. There was no mention of military service, no flight school, no connection to aviation whatsoever. "This is it?" Emma asked, her voice dangerously low. "This is all we have on a man who can fly a $9 million aircraft like it's an extension of his own body." "The agency we use is the best in the business," James said defensively. "If there was something to find, they would have found it. Maybe he's just naturally gifted. Some guys are just—" Emma shot him a look that could curdle milk. "Naturally gifted doesn't cover a zero-G pirouette 50 stories above downtown. He's a professional, and he's hiding. Find out why." She turned her attention to the more pressing fire. "And while you're at it, explain to me why I'm getting panicked texts from the chairman about Nakamura when you told me yesterday that the deal was all but signed." James's professional mask slid perfectly back into place. He straightened his tie, his expression a careful blend of concern and calm competence. "It's a minor snag, Emma, a cultural misstep. Nakamura-san felt our final offer was too aggressive. He prefers a more delicate approach. I'm already drafting a new proposal, something that shows more deference. I've left a message for his chief of staff. I assure you it's under control." His explanation was smooth, logical, and infuriating. It made her feel like she was overreacting, yet a knot of unease tightened in her stomach. "Under control, James. This is a $40 billion deal. We don't have minor snags." "And we won't," he said, his voice a soothing balm. "Let me handle the Japanese. You've got enough on your plate. I'll smooth it over. It's what you pay me for." She studied him for a long moment, then nodded curtly. "Fine, handle it. But if I get one more text like that, you'll be handling your severance package instead." Hours later, Mark Wilson pushed open the door to his small apartment. The stale air of the hallway was instantly replaced by the smell of cinnamon and warm laundry. "Daddy." A small girl with bright, curious eyes and a mop of unruly brown hair launched herself at him from the couch. Mark dropped his worn backpack and scooped her up in a hug that seemed to melt the tension from his shoulders. "Hey, Firefly." His voice softened to a gentle rumble against her hair. "How was your day with Mrs. Gable?" Sophie pulled back to look at him, her expression serious. "It was okay. We finished the volcano for my science project. It has extra baking soda for a super eruption." Her nose wrinkled slightly. "But Mrs. Gable smells like mothballs." Mark laughed, a genuine warm sound that would have been unrecognizable to anyone at Harrison Aerospace. "Well, don't tell her that. Did you get your homework done?" "All of it," she said proudly, "and I practiced my spelling words. Even pterodactyl. You're getting too smart for me." He set her down gently. "Go get washed up for dinner. I'm making the tacos you like." As she scampered off, Mark glanced around the small, meticulously clean apartment. Every piece of furniture was secondhand but well cared for. Sophie's colorful drawings were taped to the walls, a vibrant contrast to the building's drab beige paint. On a cluttered desk in the corner sat a framed photo of a woman with a smile as bright as Sophie's, her arm draped around a younger, happier-looking Mark in a flight suit. This was his world now, not a skyscraper or a boardroom, but a two-bedroom apartment where the only thing that mattered was keeping his daughter safe, happy, and far away from the life he'd left behind. The rooftop had been a mistake, a stupid, reckless impulse. He had let his guard down for a moment, and now he could only hope the consequences wouldn't follow him home. He had a feeling, however, that a woman like Emma Harrison didn't just let things go. Mark moved to the kitchen, trying to focus on the simple task of preparing dinner. His mind kept returning to the moment of weakness on the helipad. It had been so long since he'd flown. The temptation of the Bell 429 sitting there gleaming in the sunlight had overwhelmed his carefully constructed restraint. For those 90 seconds in the air, he had felt alive again. Truly alive in a way he hadn't since Sarah's death. And that was the problem. That feeling was a dangerous addiction he couldn't afford, not with Sophie depending on him. A small cough from the hallway interrupted his thoughts. Sophie stood there watching him with her mother's perceptive eyes. She took a puff from her inhaler, a ritual so common that neither of them acknowledged it anymore. "Can I help with the tacos?" Her voice was bright, showing no sign of the chronic asthma that had plagued her since birth. Mark forced a smile, pushing away thoughts of insurance statements and medication costs. "Absolutely. You're in charge of cheese distribution." Later that night, after tucking Sophie into bed, Mark sat at the small kitchen table reviewing the monthly bills. The stack seemed to grow taller each month, with Sophie's medical expenses consuming an ever larger portion of his income. The insurance coverage through Harrison Aerospace was better than most, but it had a lifetime cap that was approaching far too quickly. His phone buzzed with a notification. A reminder for Sophie's pulmonologist appointment next week. Another expense, another set of tests, another prescription that cost more than he made in a week. Mark rubbed his tired eyes. The irony wasn't lost on him. He had once commanded aircraft worth tens of millions, making split-second decisions that determined whether people lived or died. Now he was being crushed under the weight of co-pays and prescription costs, powerless to fix the one thing that mattered most. He glanced at Sarah's photo, feeling the familiar ache of her absence. She would know what to do. She always did. Mark's fingers hovered over his phone. There were people he could call, former squad mates who would help without question. But that would mean reconnecting with a world he'd walked away from, a world that had taken Sarah and nearly taken him too. He put the phone down. There had to be another way. Back in her sterile, glass-walled office, Emma stared out at the sprawling city lights, the half-eaten salad on her desk forgotten. She couldn't shake the image of the janitor's hands on the controls. Steady, confident, sure. She had built an empire on the ability to read people, to dissect their motivations and weaknesses in a single meeting. But Mark Wilson was a locked room with no key. She'd had James check on her personal pilot, Gavin. The story was that his son had a sudden severe case of pneumonia and had been rushed to the hospital. It was plausible, but the timing felt too convenient. Another piece of a puzzle she couldn't see. Frustrated, she packed her briefcase and headed for the private elevator. The day was over, but as she exited the building onto the street, her driver holding the limo door open, she saw him. Across the street, standing under the dim orange glow of a bus stop, was Mark Wilson. He wasn't looking at the traffic. He was staring down at his phone, a small, sad smile on his face. Emma stopped her hand on the car door. For a second, she considered walking over there demanding answers. But what would she say? Why are you lying about who you are? What right did she have to ask? The bus pulled up, its brakes hissing. Mark put his phone away and got on, disappearing into the crowd of tired commuters. Emma watched until the bus's red taillights vanished around a corner. She got into her car. Just drive, she told her driver, her voice flat. She didn't know where she was going, but she knew one thing for sure in Mordo. She couldn't rely on background checks or employee files. If she wanted to know who Mark Wilson was, she was going to have to find out for herself. The next morning, Emma arrived at the office with new resolve. The direct approach had failed. The official channels were a dead end. If she wanted to understand the enigma that was Mark Wilson, she would have to change the rules of the game. Her opportunity was waiting in her inbox under the subject line, Reminder Harrison Annual Company Picnic this Saturday. Every year, the company hosted a massive mandatory fun day for its employees and their families. It was a carefully orchestrated PR move meant to foster a sense of community while providing excellent footage for recruitment videos. Emma despised it. She usually made a brief 20-minute appearance, shook a few hands, and left. It was an inefficient use of a Saturday, but this year it was the perfect observation deck, a neutral ground where the janitor and the CEO could for a few hours simply be people. She RSVP'd as attending for the entire day. Good morning, Emma. James glided into her office with a tablet. I've got good news. I just had a productive preliminary call with Nakamura's number 2. I think I found a way to salvage the deal. Emma raised an eyebrow. Already they felt we were undervaluing their proprietary distribution network. He explained his presentation flawless. So I drafted a memo of understanding that gives them a slightly larger stake in the joint venture's logistics arm. It'll cut into our profit margin by a fraction of a % in the short term, but it's a sign of goodwill. It's the delicate approach they wanted. I think if you sign off, we can get them back to the table by Monday. Emma scanned the document. On the surface, it seemed like a reasonable concession, but something felt off. Giving up even a fraction of control in logistics, the backbone of their global operation, was a significant strategic shift. It felt less like a compromise and more like a surrender. This is a big move, James. It sets a dangerous precedent. It's a bigger move to lose the deal entirely, he countered smoothly. This is a quick, decisive fix. It shows strength through flexibility. They'll see it as a mark of respect. The pressure from the board was immense. The clock was ticking. Against her better judgment, Emma nodded. Fine, send it. But James, if this backfires, it's on you. Don't worry, Emma, he said with a confident smile. I've got your back. Later that afternoon, Emma found herself in the company's executive gym, an exclusive facility on the 47th floor that few employees even knew existed. Her boxing trainer, Marcus, held the punch pads as she delivered a series of rapid combinations. Keep your guard up, Marcus instructed, as she narrowly avoided a counterpunch. You're distracted today. Emma delivered a vicious right hook that made Marcus wince despite the padding. I'm running a multi-billion-dollar corporation during a potential acquisition crisis. Distracted is my default state. Marcus shook his head. No, this is different. You're usually hyper-focused when you're here. Today you're somewhere else. He wasn't wrong. Her mind kept returning to the janitor with pilot's hands and the deal that was slipping through her fingers. Both problems refused to align with her understanding of the world, and few things irritated Emma Harrison more than puzzles she couldn't solve. After the session showered and changed back into her business attire, Emma took an unexpected detour on her way back to her office. The 48th floor was undergoing renovation, the future home of their IT-funded R&D division. It was also according to the maintenance schedule she had quietly accessed, where Mark Wilson was assigned this week. She found him replacing ceiling tiles in a half-finished conference room, working methodically from a rolling scaffold. For a moment, she simply observed him. There was a precision to his movements that spoke of discipline and training far beyond what was required to clean floors or replace home ceiling panels. Mr. Wilson, Emma's voice cut through the empty space. Mark turned surprised, briefly crossing his features before his expression settled back into neutral deference. He climbed down from the scaffold with efficient grace. Ms. Harrison, is there a problem with the maintenance? No, the maintenance is fine. I wanted to speak with you about Saturday's company picnic. A flicker of wariness crossed his face. I'm aware of the event, ma'am. I noticed you're not on the attendance list. Mark's posture subtly shifted. A defensive adjustment, so slight most would miss it. It's during my weekend with my daughter. I can't leave her with a sitter. Emma had anticipated this. The picnic is a family event, Mr. Wilson. Bring her. She watched him carefully, noting the micro expressions that betrayed his internal calculation. He was weighing risks, assessing threats, making tactical decisions, all behind a mask of simple consideration. I'll think about it, ma'am. Thank you for the invitation. It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a direct refusal either. Emma decided not to push further. That would be good. I think you'd both enjoy it. She turned to leave, then paused. That was quite an impressive demonstration on the helipad yesterday. Mark's expression didn't change, but Emma caught the slight tensing of his shoulders. I apologize for that, ma'am. It was inappropriate. On the contrary, Mr. Wilson, it was extraordinary. What I can't figure out is why a man with your skills is replacing ceiling tiles in my building. Sometimes simple work is exactly what a person needs, Ms. Harrison. His voice was quiet but firm, closing the door on further questions. Emma nodded, accepting the boundary. For now. I hope to see you Saturday, Mr. Wilson. You and your daughter. As she walked away, Emma could feel his eyes on her back, assessing her just as carefully as she had assessed him. For the first time in years, she felt as though she wasn't the most dangerous person in the room. That night, Mark sat on the edge of Sophie's bed, reading the final pages of The Little Prince. It was their third time through the book, but Sophie insisted it wasn't boring because you notice different things each time you read it. As he closed the book, Sophie looked up at him with serious eyes. Are we really going to the company picnic on Saturday? Mark hesitated. He had mentioned it only in passing during dinner, weighing the pros and cons aloud, but Sophie had latched onto the idea with unexpected enthusiasm. Do you want to go? He asked carefully. Sophie nodded vigorously. Mia from school went to her mom's company picnic, and they had 3 bouncy castles and cotton candy and face painting. Mark smiled despite his reservations. It does sound like fun. Then we should go, Sophie declared with the simple logic of an 8-year-old. Plus, I want to see where you work. Is it really in the clouds? Not quite in the clouds, Firefly, but pretty high up. After tucking her in, Mark returned to the living room and pulled out his laptop. He searched for Emma Harrison Aerospace, and was met with thousands of results. Business journals hailed her as the Ice Queen of Aerospace, a ruthless strategist who had doubled the company's value since taking over from her father 10 years ago. Society pages speculated about her non-existent personal life, creating narratives from the few public appearances she made outside of business functions. None of it explained why the CEO of a Fortune 500 company was personally inviting a janitor to a company picnic. Emma Harrison didn't make social calls. She didn't engage with employees 52 levels below her on the corporate ladder. And she certainly didn't take no for an answer, which meant she wanted something. The question was, what Mark closed the laptop, his mind racing through scenarios. The simplest explanation was that she was curious about his flying abilities and wanted to know more. But curiosity could be dangerous, for both of them. The day of the picnic arrived with perfect early summer weather. Clear skies, a gentle breeze, and temperatures warm enough for comfort, but not so hot as to make the outdoor event unbearable. Harrison Aerospace had rented out an entire riverside park for the occasion, sparing no expense to create the illusion of corporate family. Emma arrived precisely at 10:00 a.m., dressed in casual designer wear that probably cost more than most employees' monthly salaries. She felt deeply out of place among the colorful chaos of bouncy castles, food trucks, and hundreds of employees attempting to relax under the watchful eye of senior management. She made her obligatory rounds, chatting with department heads and their spouses, presenting the approachable face of leadership that these events required. All the while, her eyes scanned the crowds, looking for the janitor and his daughter. She found them near the small lake at the edge of the park. Mark wasn't with the other maintenance workers who had formed a tight circle around a barbecue grill. Instead, he was sitting on a checkered blanket, with his daughter helping her meticulously construct a small boat out of a leaf and a twig. He was wearing a simple gray t-shirt and jeans, and without the janitor's uniform, he looked different. Younger, more relaxed, but with a persistent watchfulness in his eyes. Emma took a breath and approached. Wilson Mark looked up, and for a split second, a guarded, almost hostile look crossed his face before being replaced by bland neutrality. Ms. Harrison, please call me Emma, at least for today. This is your daughter. This is Sophie, Mark said, his hand resting protectively on his daughter's shoulder. Sophie looked Emma up and down with the unfiltered honesty of an 8-year-old. Your face is so serious. Are you mad about the grass? Emma blinked momentarily, thrown off balance by the question. No, I'm not mad about the grass. Okay, Sophie said, apparently satisfied. She held up her creation. Look, it's a boat. It's for the Frog King. It's a very structurally sound boat, Emma offered, feeling ridiculous. Mark's lips twitched in a ghost of a smile. She's the chief naval architect. The conversation stalled. The silence was thick with the unspoken power dynamic between them. Emma was about to retreat to chalk the whole thing up to a bad idea when a high-pitched buzzing sound filled the air. One of the marketing VPs was showing off a new high-end drone, making it perform swoops and dives over the lake. As the drone zip-habbed past their blanket, Mark's reaction was instantaneous and subtle. His posture stiffened. His eyes tracked the drone not with casual interest, but with the focused, analytical gaze of a predator. He flinched, a barely perceptible tightening of his shoulders as if bracing for a sound he expected to follow the buzz. The relaxed father was gone, and in his place was someone else entirely. Someone harder, colder, and far more dangerous. Emma saw it. The mask had slipped just for a second, but it was enough. That wasn't the reaction of a helicopter hobbyist or a weekend pilot. That was the instinctive response of someone who had heard that sound in a very different context, a place where that buzzing was followed by something lethal. The moment passed. The drone flew away. Mark visibly forced his shoulders to relax, turning his attention back to Sophie, but the shift had been undeniable. "Daddy, can we get ice cream?" Sophie asked, oblivious to the silent drama. "Sure, Firefly," Mark said, his voice a little too tight. He stood up and looked at Emma. "If you'll excuse us, Ms. Harrison." "Of course," Emma watched as he took Sophie's hand and walked away, melting into the crowd. She stood rooted to the spot, the drone's buzz still ringing in her ears. He wasn't just a pilot. That reaction wasn't from a hobbyist. It was instinct. It was training. It was the reaction of a man who had seen combat, who had learned to associate that sound with imminent danger. From across the lawn, James watched Emma staring after the janitor. He saw the look on her face, the confusion, the dawning respect, the fascination. He pulled out his phone and sent a quick text. "The CEO is distracted. Accelerate the timeline. I want the board to see the Q3 projections by Monday morning. The ones we discussed." He put his phone away, a predatory smile touching his lips. Emma thought she was playing some clever game, trying to unravel a mystery. She had no idea she was just a pawn in his. The Monday morning after the picnic felt different. The air in Emma's office was thin and sharp. The mystery of Mark Wilson had burrowed into her mind, a puzzle she kept turning over and over. The man who comforted his daughter over a leaf boat was the same man who reacted to a toy drone with the instincts of a trained soldier. The two images didn't fit, and Emma hated things that didn't fit. Her thoughts were interrupted by James sweeping into her office, his face a perfect mask of grave concern. He was holding a tablet displaying a flurry of emails from Tokyo. "It's worse than I thought." His voice was low and urgent. "Nakamura's board is interpreting our revised offer as a sign of weakness. They're calling it a desperate move." Emma's blood ran cold. She snatched the tablet and read the latest message. The respectful tone from last week was gone, replaced by a list of new non-negotiable demands. They wanted a larger stake, a lower acquisition price, and 2 seats on the North American board. It wasn't a negotiation. It was a surrender document. "They're gutting us." Emma breathed, her voice barely a whisper. "They're using our own concession as leverage to bleed us dry. I don't understand how this could have happened." James shook his head in feigned disbelief. "My contacts assured me this was the right play. It's almost as if someone tipped them off that we were more desperate than we let on." The implication hung in the air, that Emma's leadership was weak, that the company was vulnerable under her command. The chairman called 2 minutes later. His voice was glacial. The board was convening an emergency session on Friday. She had until then to either fix the Nakamura deal or present a viable alternative. If she couldn't, they would be forced to explore new leadership options. The threat was clear. She was on the verge of losing her father's company. For the next hour, Emma was a whirlwind of controlled fury. She called her legal team, her CFO, her head of strategy. They all said the same thing. Nakamura had them backed into a corner. To fight back would be to risk a hostile takeover attempt. To acquiesce would be corporate suicide. She was trapped. Defeated, she walked to the vast window of her office, which overlooked the helipad. The helicopter sat there, silent and gleaming, a monument to a power she suddenly felt she no longer had. She thought of the janitor, of the calm certainty in his hands, as he'd mastered the machine. He wasn't trapped. He was free. An idea wild and desperate began to form in her mind. It was insane. It was a long shot, but it was the only move on the board she had left that wasn't defensive. That night, she found him on the 48th floor, methodically cleaning the glass walls of a deserted conference room. The rhythmic squeak of his squeegee was the only sound. "Wilson," she said, her voice echoing in the empty space. He stopped, turning slowly. There was no surprise in his eyes. It was as if he'd been expecting her. "Ms. Harrison, I'm not here to talk about your job," she said, getting straight to the point. "I'm here to talk about your other one." His expression didn't change. "I only have one job." "Stop it," she snapped, her patience gone. "I saw you at the picnic, your reaction to that drone. My head of security is a former Marine. He flinches at car backfires. You flinched at a toy. That isn't a hobby, Wilson. That's muscle memory. The kind you don't get at a weekend flight school. The kind you get when that sound is followed by gunfire." He remained silent, his face a stoic mask. "The Nakamura deal is collapsing," she said, deciding to lay all her cards on the table. "I have one chance to save it. There's a man, a former associate of my father's, named Hiroshi Tanaka. He's a recluse, but he has Nakamura's ear. If I can speak to him face to face, I can salvage this. But he lives on a private island off the coast of British Columbia. It's accessible only by helicopter, and there's a storm system moving in. Commercial flights are being grounded." She took a breath. "My pilot Gavin is still out. His son took a turn for the worse. I need a pilot, someone who can handle rough weather and who doesn't exist on any official flight logs. I need you." Mark picked up his bucket and started toward the door. "You're mistaken, ma'am. I'm a janitor. I can't help you." "Everyone has a price," Emma said, her voice hardening. "Not me," he replied without looking back. "What about your daughter?" He froze his hand on the doorframe. He turned, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of fire in his tired eyes. "You leave her out of this. I can't," Emma said, pressing her advantage, hating herself for it, but seeing no other way. "I know you spend a third of your salary on the co-pay for her medication. I know your insurance plan has a lifetime cap that you're getting dangerously close to. And I know you watch her every time she breathes, terrified it might be the one that hitches." His face paled. The stoic mask crumbled, revealing a raw, profound fear. "This isn't a request anymore, Mark," she said, using his first name for the first time. "It's an offer, one flight. You get me to Tanaka and back, and I will set up a private, irrevocable trust in Sophie's name. It will cover all of her medical expenses, every doctor, every treatment, every prescription for the rest of her life. It will also pay for her entire education through to any graduate school she chooses. She will never have to worry about a single bill ever again." She let the words sink into the silence. She was offering him the one thing his quiet, invisible life couldn't give him: absolute security for his child. He stood there motionless, caught between the ghosts he was running from and the future he so desperately wanted for his daughter. His hands, the same hands that had so expertly commanded a multi-million-dollar machine, were clenched into white-knuckled fists at his sides. The silence in the conference room stretched for a lifetime. Mark's jaw was a hard line, his gaze fixed on a point somewhere beyond Emma, somewhere deep in his past. She could almost see the war raging behind his eyes, the instinct to run versus the fierce, primal need to protect his child. Finally, he spoke, and his voice was flat, devoid of all emotion. It was the voice of a soldier accepting a mission. "Fine, I'll do it, but we have terms." Emma nodded, keeping her expression neutral. "I'm listening. First, the trust is to be drawn up by my lawyer, not yours. It will be funded in full and the transfer confirmed before we take off. Second, this is a one-time contract for transportation services. You will not ask me about my past, my training, or my family. I am not your employee. I am a contractor. Third, when we land back here, the contract is terminated. You and I go back to what we were. You don't know me, and I don't know you. Understood. Understood, Emma said without hesitation. The terms were harsh, but they were a small price to pay. We fly tonight, Mark stated, not asked. The storm front will be at its worst around 0300. I want to be through it before then. Have the helicopter fully fueled and ready for a pre-flight inspection in 1 hour. I want updated meteorological charts, satellite imagery of the flight path and the island's landing coordinates. And I want them on a private air-gapped tablet. Nothing connected to your company's network. He was no longer a janitor. The transformation was instantaneous and absolute. He was a commander, his every word precise, and filled with an authority that Emma hadn't seen from anyone in her company, herself included. She simply nodded again. I'll make the arrangements. As Mark walked away to make a call to his lawyer and arrange for Sophie's care, Emma felt a dizzying sense of vertigo. She had just handed over control of her life's most critical mission to a man whose last name she barely knew. Downstairs, James watched the activity with a growing sense of unease. A flurry of encrypted emails from Emma's personal account. A call to the airfield hangar ordering her personal helicopter prepped and fueled for an unscheduled midnight flight. It made no sense. Gavin, her pilot, was out. Who was she flying with? He walked past the janitor's supply closet on his way to the executive garage and saw Mark Wilson inside, not cleaning, but packing a small military-style go bag with a quiet, focused intensity. James slowed, his eyes narrowing. It couldn't be. The rooftop incident was a fluke, a party trick. He pulled out his phone and made a call to a contact in the airfield's control tower. I need you to keep an eye on the transponder for N429SD, he said, reciting the helicopter's tail number. Let me know its flight plan the second it's filed and who's listed as the pilot. An hour later, Emma met Mark on the rooftop. He had changed into dark functional cargo pants and a worn leather jacket. He ignored her completely, heading straight for the helicopter. For the next 20 minutes, he moved around the aircraft with a flashlight, checking rotors, fluid lines, and avionics with a meticulousness that bordered on obsessive. He was in a different world, a world of checklists and fail-safes. Finally, he gave a sharp nod. It'll fly. He gestured for the tablet, and she handed it to him. He studied the weather patterns, his face grim. It's going to be rough. Once you're in, you don't get out until I say so. You listen to my every command without question. That clear? Crystal, Emma replied, strapping herself into the co-pilot's seat. The takeoff was even more impressive than the first time. There was no showmanship now, only raw efficiency. The helicopter lifted into the turbulent night sky and banked sharply, heading northwest over the dark, sprawling city. For the first hour, they flew in silence, the rhythmic thrum of the rotors filling the small cockpit. Below them, the city lights gave way to the black expanse of the wilderness. Why, Emma finally asked, unable to bear the silence. Mark's eyes remained fixed on the instruments. We had a deal, Ms. Harrison, no questions. That wasn't a question about your past, she countered. It was about your present. Why push a mop when you can do this? He was quiet for a long time. Because this, he said, his voice a low growl, gets people killed. Pushing a mop doesn't. Before she could respond, the helicopter jolted violently. A wall of black clouds, invisible moments before, loomed ahead of them. Rain began to lash against the windshield, thick and furious. The aircraft dropped suddenly, and Emma's stomach leaped into her throat. She gripped the edge of her seat, her carefully constructed composure finally cracking. A small, involuntary gasp escaped her lips. Mark's head snapped toward her. The hard, distant look in his eyes was replaced by something else. It was the calm, focused gaze of a protector. Hey, he said, his voice cutting cleanly through the roar of the storm. It was steady, reassuring. Look at me, I've got you. Just breathe. This is just weather. I've flown in worse, Valvain. She met his eyes, and in their depths she saw an absolute certainty that defied the chaos raging around them. He wasn't just a pilot, he was a lifeline. And as the storm tossed their tiny aircraft through the inky blackness thousands of feet above the earth, Emma realized she had placed her life, her company, and her entire future in the hands of a complete stranger. And stranger still, she trusted him. The helicopter bucked and dropped a sickening lurch that felt like a freefall. Alarms blared in the cockpit, a high-pitched symphony of disaster. Emma's knuckles were white where she gripped her seat. Outside the cockpit window, there was nothing but swirling, violent blackness, pierced intermittently by flashes of lightning that illuminated the torrential rain. Crosswinds are hitting 80 knots. Mark's voice remained impossibly calm despite the chaos. It's trying to push us into the mountainside. I have to take us down, find a layer of stable air. He pushed the cyclic forward, a controlled dive that felt anything but controlled to Emma. The rain hammered against the glass and the wind howled like a living thing. She watched his hands as they moved across the controls, a blur of constant, minute adjustments. He wasn't just flying the helicopter. He was wrestling with the storm, anticipating every gust, countering every downdraft. He had become part of the machine. There his eyes darted between the instruments and the void outside. Below the sheer. Hold on. He brought the helicopter into a sharp banking turn that pressed Emma deep into her seat. For a terrifying moment, they were flying sideways before Mark leveled out. The violent shaking lessened. The alarms fell silent. While the storm still raged around them, the air here was smoother, the aircraft stable. They had punched through the worst of it. Emma released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Her heart hammered against her ribs. How did you do that? I don't fly the weather. I fly the aircraft. His focus remained absolute, eyes never leaving the windscreen. The storm doesn't care about your plans or your fears. You respect it, you work with it, but you never fight it directly. You find the path through. The simple philosophy struck Emma with unexpected force. It was the opposite of how she ran her company, of how she lived her life. She bulldozed obstacles, confronted problems head-on, overpowered resistance through sheer will. Yet here, thousands of feet above the earth in the heart of a storm, her approach would have killed them both. 20 minutes later, a small, flickering light appeared through the rain, a remote island rugged and battered by the sea. Mark circled it, once his eyes scanning the terrain before beginning his descent toward a small, windswept landing pad carved out of the rock. He set the helicopter down with a final gentle bump. The moment the engine spooled down, the cockpit was plunged into a profound silence, broken only by the sound of the wind and rain. We're here, Mark's voice was flat again, the pilot receding, the contractor returning. An old man in a waterproof coat was waiting for them, holding a powerful lantern. This was Hiroshi Tanaka, his face a roadmap of hard-won wisdom, his eyes sharp and discerning, despite his advanced age. He led them into a simple, elegant house filled with books and the scent of cedar. He listened to Emma's pitch for a full hour without saying a word, his hands folded around a cup of steaming tea. Emma was brilliant. She laid out the data, the projections, the mutual benefits of a restructured deal with Nakamura. She showed him the preliminary designs for their next-generation hybrid propulsion system. She explained how the merger would revolutionize trans-Pacific air travel while reducing carbon emissions by 40%. It was a masterful corporate argument, and it was failing. You speak of profits and margins, Miss Harrison. Tanaka's voice was a low rumble when he finally broke his silence. These are temporary things. My friend Nakamura values loyalty. He believes you have shown none. He believes your company has lost its spirit, its soul. Your numbers will not convince him. Emma's face fell. She had come all this way for nothing. Desperation clawed at her. Tanaka's gaze shifted from her to Mark, who had been standing silently by the door, a stoic shadow. And you, Tanaka, asked, his voice sharp. You are her pilot. You flew through this storm. Mark simply nodded. Yes, sir. You must have great faith in her plan to risk your life for it, Tanaka observed. Mark's jaw tightened. He glanced at Emma, then back at the old man. He knew he was supposed to stay silent, that this was not his business. But Emma's face, pale and defeated, stirred something in him. He thought of Sophie, of the promise of her future. He had a debt to pay. Sir Mark's voice was quiet but firm. I don't know anything about her plan, but I've been in situations where the plan falls apart in the first 5 minutes. When that happens, you don't trust the plan. You trust the person flying next to you. The room fell silent. Tanaka stared at Mark, a long, appraising look. He saw the janitor, the pilot, and the soldier all in one. He saw a man who understood things that couldn't be quantified on a spreadsheet. He then looked at Emma, truly looked at her, and saw not just a ruthless CEO, but a leader who had inspired that kind of trust in the man she'd hired. A slow smile spread across Tanaka's face. I see, he said. He reached for an old rotary phone. I will make the call. Back at Harrison Aerospace, James Collins paced his office like a caged wolf. His contact at the airfield had confirmed the impossible. The flight plan was filed under a shell corporation, and the pilot was listed as a John Doe, but the man who boarded the helicopter with Emma was the janitor. Emma's reckless gamble might actually pay off. James couldn't let that happen. His own carefully laid plans were about to come to fruition. He picked up his phone. "It's me. She's gone rogue. An unsanctioned, off-the-books trip. We can't wait until Friday." Frame it as a mental health crisis, a breakdown from the pressure. Leak the flight details to the board. "I want an emergency vote called for 8:00 a.m. tomorrow. It's time to remove her." Relief washed over Emma in a dizzying wave as they lifted off from the island. Tanaka had made the call. Nakamura had agreed to stand down and reopen honest negotiations. She had done it. She had saved the company. "Thank you, Mark." Her voice filled with a genuine gratitude that surprised even her. I couldn't have her phone buzzed, vibrating against the console. A single automated email had pushed through the satellite connection. She opened it. Subject: mandatory emergency board meeting. Her blood turned to ice. She read the first line of the attached memo drafted by the board's vice chairman. "In light of CEO Emma Harrison's erratic behavior and unauthorized use of company assets for a high-risk, unsanctioned journey." While she was fighting for the company's life, James had been moving in for the kill. How fast can this thing go? Her voice trembled with a new kind of fear. Mark glanced at the message, then at the fuel gauge and the storm clouds still churning behind them. "Not fast enough. They're not just trying to fire you, they're ambushing you. There's no way we make it back by 8:00. Even with a tailwind, we're 3 hours out minimum. The meeting will be over before we even touch down." "He'll have won." Mark's eyes flickered from the blinking red light of the emergency notification back to his navigation screen. He saw the storm front. They had just escaped a churning mass of red and yellow on the weather radar. But he also saw a narrow, unstable corridor running along its southern edge. A jet stream. It was dangerous, unpredictable, and would feel like riding a bull through a hurricane. It would also cut their travel time in half. "There's one way," he said, his voice grim, "but you're not going to like it." Emma looked from the churning radar to the quiet resolve on his face. "I don't have to like it. I just have to survive it." He gave a sharp nod and banked the helicopter hard, heading back toward the edge of the storm. The ride was rough, the aircraft shuddering as it fought the violent air currents. But Mark's control was absolute. They were no longer running from the storm. They were using it. He planned this. Emma's voice was barely audible over the engine. All of it. The bad advice on the Nakamura deal. Gavin's son getting sick. It was all him. "James," why, Mark asked, his eyes never leaving the windscreen. "My job." Emma laughed bitterly. "My father built this company from nothing. When he died, the board saw me as a placeholder, the daughter who inherited the crown. I've spent the last 10 years proving them wrong, proving I was more than just his legacy. James was my first hire. He was hungry, brilliant. I trusted him." She slumped in her seat. "He's been playing the long game, waiting for the perfect moment to make me look weak and unstable so he can step in as the calm, steady hand. Maybe he's right. I flew off in a storm with a man I don't know, chasing a ghost to save a deal he probably sabotaged in the first place." "It is erratic. It's not erratic to fight for something you care about," Mark said quietly. The simple, direct statement hit her with surprising force. "Is that why you did it? Why you walked away from all this? Because you cared too much?" Mark was silent for a long time, the helicopter hurtling through the dark. "My wife, Sarah, she was an Air Force pararescue specialist. So was I. We met on a training mission. She was smarter, faster, and braver than anyone in our unit. We were a team in the air and on the ground." He took a slow, deep breath. "On our last deployment, we were on a rescue mission. A helicopter carrying medical supplies had gone down in a hostile valley. Simple mission: get in secure, the assets get out. But the intelligence was bad. The valley wasn't empty. We followed protocol to the letter. We did everything right, and it didn't matter. We lost 2 medics and Sarah. She was hit pulling the last man onto our chopper. She died before we even cleared the ridge. The cockpit was silent, save for the roar of the wind. I held her hand," Mark whispered, his voice thick with a memory that would never fade. "And I realized that all the training, all the protocols, all the skill in the world, it doesn't matter. You can do everything right and still lose. The system I dedicated my life to, the one I believed in, it couldn't protect the one person I couldn't live without. So I left. I took our daughter Sophie and I disappeared. I took a job where the only thing at stake was a clean floor because a clean floor never leaves a hole in your life. Emma felt tears welling in her eyes. For him, for his wife, for the hollowed-out pain in his voice. Before she could find the words to respond, her tablet pinged with a weak signal. "It's one of the board members, an old ally of my father's," she said, her voice urgent. "He's asking for proof of James's sabotage, but I can't get a stable connection to the company server to pull the data logs. The signal is too weak to punch through the storm clutter," Mark said, his pilot brain taking over again. "Angle the tablet toward that comm satellite. It's a long shot, but we might be able to bounce a signal." As Emma angled the device, Mark leaned over to get a better look at the screen. A file directory was struggling to load. Most of it was timing out, but one folder name caught his eye: K Archive in car. "What's that?" He pointed. "It's James's encrypted archive," Emma explained. "He told me it was for redundant backups of sensitive project files. Standard procedure." "It's not standard procedure to run a triple-layer AES encryption protocol on a backup folder." Mark's eyes narrowed. "And that port he's using? It's a ghost port. It's designed to be invisible to network security sweeps. That's not a backup folder, Ms. Harrison. That's a digital dead drop. He's been running a shadow network inside your own system." Emma stared at him. "Can you prove it?" "Not from here," Mark said, "but I know what it looks like. We found the weapon. We just need to find the bullets." The sun was just beginning to stain the eastern horizon, a pale bruised purple, as the city skyline came into view. They were going to make it back in time. But time wasn't the problem anymore. "It doesn't matter," Emma said, the fight draining out of her. "We'll walk into that boardroom. I'll accuse him. He'll deny it. And the board will see a desperate, paranoid CEO making wild accusations. He's got them completely snowed." "We have no proof." Mark's gaze was fixed on Harrison Tower, the tallest building in the city, its helipad waiting for them. The soldier, the strategist who had lain dormant for 8 years, was now wide awake. "You're right," he said, his voice cold and sharp as forged steel. "The boardroom isn't the battlefield. It's the target. We're not going to walk in there and defend ourselves. We're going on the attack." The helicopter's skids touched down on the helipad with less than 10 minutes to spare before the 8:00 a.m. meeting. The moment the rotor spun down, Mark was unstrapped and moving. He was no longer the janitor, the pilot, or the grieving widower. He was the soldier he had been trained to be, and Harrison Tower was his new battlefield. "They're expecting you to be defensive," he said, his voice clipped and precise as he helped Emma out of the cockpit. "They're expecting you to walk in there cornered and emotional. You're going to give them exactly what they want." Emma stared at him bewildered. "I'm going to go in there and lose." "That's your plan." "You're going to go in there and stall," he corrected. "Argue, get angry, question their numbers, accuse James of being ambitious. Do whatever you have to do to keep them all in that room focused on you. You're the bait. Can you do that?" Emma's back straightened. A flicker of her old formidable self returned. "I can do that," Goodmark said. "While you're keeping them busy, I need 2 things from you: your master key card and your admin-level network password. I need unrestricted access to the building and the system." Without hesitation, she pulled the key card from her neck and handed it to him, reciting a complex 16-digit alphanumeric password from memory. There was no fear in her eyes, only absolute trust. "What are you going to do?" she asked. "James built himself a hiding place in your network," Mark said, his eyes already scanning the building's layout. "I'm going to make him burn it down himself." He turned and disappeared down the rooftop stairwell just as the boardroom doors opened to admit the somber-faced board members. Emma took a deep, steadying breath, smoothed her jacket, and walked into her own ambush. The atmosphere in the room was arctic. James sat to the right of the vice chairman, looking the part of the concerned, reluctant heir apparent. Arthur, the vice chairman, a stern man in his 60s, began without preamble. "We've called this meeting due to a series of deeply troubling events. Your handling of the Nakamura deal has been, to put it mildly, a disaster. And now we have this unauthorized excursion. It suggests an instability in your leadership." James presented his case with practiced perfection. He displayed emails Emma had supposedly ignored, profit projections that were subtly doctored to look catastrophic in the flight logs from her rogue trip. "I am as loyal to Emma as anyone," his voice dripped with false sincerity. But my first loyalty must be to this company, and I am worried. Her behavior has become erratic. I fear she is no longer fit to lead. Emma fought back just as Mark had instructed. She tore into James's numbers. She questioned his timeline. She accused him of being a backstabbing opportunist. It was a spectacular display of defiance, and it was buying Mark precious time. 2 floors below Mark slid Emma's keycard through the server room's security scanner. The light flashed green. He slipped inside the cold, humming heart of the company. He found an open terminal, and his fingers began to fly across the keyboard, the muscle memory of a forgotten lifetime coming back to him in a flood. He wasn't trying to break James's triple-layer encryption. He didn't have the time. He was going after the ghost port itself. He located the hidden pathway and wrote a simple, malicious script. It was designed to create a recursive loop, rerouting a sliver of all outgoing network traffic back through James's hidden archive. It was a digital bottleneck. In minutes, the entire system would grind to a halt, and every diagnostic would point to the encrypted folder as the source of the chaos. Back in the boardroom, Emma was mid-sentence when the main presentation screen behind her flickered and went red. A massive alert box appeared. Network integrity failure. Critical. Every laptop and tablet in the room flashed the same warning. Alarms began to chime. "What in God's name is happening?" Arthur demanded, rising from his seat. James stared at the screen, his smug confidence instantly vanishing. A secondary alert appeared, this one containing a line of diagnostic code. Source of instability partition K archive/NCR. James's blood ran cold. It was his archive, his private hidden folder. How could they have found it? Panic seized him. If I perform a deep diagnostic on that partition to fix the crash, they'll find everything. The stolen data, the correspondence with their rivals, the entire blueprint of his betrayal. I can fix this, James stammered, jumping to his feet. It must be a server malfunction. I can isolate it from my office terminal. He bolted from the room, leaving a stunned board behind. In the server room, Mark watched the network traffic monitor. He saw James's unique login splash across the screen from his office PC. He saw the frantic sequence of commands. Then the one he was waiting for appeared. Initiate command purge partition archive at NCR. True. James was wiping it. He was trying to destroy the evidence. Mark didn't stop the command. He let it run. But as it executed, he initiated his own program, a packet sniffer, that recorded every keystroke, every command, every byte of data transmitted from James's terminal. He captured it all. James's login credentials, the timestamp showing it was during a critical network failure, and the explicit irreversible command to permanently destroy a hidden folder of company data. A folder whose existence was a fireable offense and whose destruction during a crisis was a federal crime. The purge completed. The system alarm stopped. The network stabilized as the bottleneck vanished. Mark saved the recording to a secure file, a grim, triumphant look on his face. The boardroom debate didn't matter anymore. He didn't have a theory. He didn't have a suspicion. He had proof. James strode back into the boardroom, dabbing a handkerchief on his brow. He projected an air of weary triumph. "My apologies for the alarm," he announced, his voice smooth once more. "It appears a corrupted data packet from an older server was creating a network loop. I've isolated and purged the anomaly. Everything is stable now." He shot a condescending look at Emma. "As I was saying, we need steady leadership. Someone who can handle a crisis without flying off the handle." Arthur, the vice chairman, nodded grimly. "Thank you for your quick action, James. Now, if there is no further discussion, I believe it's time to vote." He was raising his hand to call the question when the boardroom doors swung open. Mark Wilson walked in. He wasn't wearing his janitor's uniform. He was just a man in a worn leather jacket, but he moved with a quiet authority that commanded the attention of every person in the room. He walked past the stunned board members, his eyes locked on James. James's face went white with shock and disbelief. Mark stopped at the head of the table and placed the tablet in front of Arthur. "The corrupted data packet has a name," Mark said, his voice calm and even. He tapped the screen and a confession appeared. He played the recording. The massive screen at the end of the boardroom, which moments before had been displaying James's doctored reports, now showed a stark, undeniable truth. The board watched in silent, horrified fascination. They saw James Collins's unique login credentials appear on screen. They saw the timestamp confirming he was logged in from his office while he was supposed to be in this very meeting. And they saw the command line stark and damning purge partition, K archive/NCR true. As you can see, Emma's voice cut through the silence like glass. While the board was in session, Mr. Collins accessed a hidden unauthorized archive on the company's servers and permanently deleted it. She paused, letting the weight of her next words land. That archive, which he just illegally destroyed, contained all of his correspondence with our rivals at Nakamura Corporation. It was the complete record of his corporate espionage. The color drained from James's face. He was trapped. That's a lie, he shrieked, his voice cracking, his composure shattering into a million pieces. He's a hacker. She brought in a hacker. This man is a janitor. He doctored that footage. It's a fabrication, he pointed a trembling finger at Mark. He's a nobody. You can't possibly believe this. This grease monkey over me. His hysterical outburst did more to confirm his guilt than any evidence could have. The room was silent, save for his ragged breathing. Arthur, the vice chairman, looked from James's wild, panicked eyes to Mark's stoic calm. His face was like stone. Security, he said into the room's intercom. 2 uniformed guards entered the room. James looked wildly around, but there were no friendly faces, no allies left. He had been so certain of his victory, he had never once considered the quiet man who cleaned the floors. As the guards escorted him out, his final desperate shouts echoed down the hall. She's the one who's unstable. You're all making a huge mistake. Then he was gone. Arthur turned to Emma. The cold judgment in his eyes was gone, replaced by a look of profound and humbled respect. Emma, his voice softened. On behalf of this board, I offer you our deepest, most sincere apologies. We were wrong. Thank you, Arthur, Emma said simply. The vice chairman then looked at Mark, who had remained silent throughout the ordeal. And you, Mr. Wilson, is it? We owe you a debt of gratitude that I'm not sure this company can ever truly repay. I was just taking out the trash, Mark replied, his expression unreadable. After the other board members had filed out, offering their own quiet apologies to Emma, she and Mark were left alone in the vast silent room. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. The crisis was over. They had won. Emma looked at him, really looked at him, not as a pilot or a soldier or a janitor, but as the man who had walked through the fire with her. So she said, a small, tired smile playing on her lips. What now, contractor Mark allowed the ghost of a smile to touch his own face. It was the first one she had ever really seen. I think my contract is terminated, ma'am. Emma, she corrected him softly. My name is Emma. Mark, he replied. The titles and barriers that had separated them were gone, burned away in the chaos of the last 24 hours. All that was left were 2 people standing in the quiet aftermath of a battle they had won together, with the unspoken question of what came next hanging between them. A week after the boardroom showdown, a quiet hum of efficiency had returned to Harrison Aerospace. But it was a different kind of quiet. The fear was gone, replaced by a current of hushed, excited gossip. The story of the janitor who saved the company had spread like wildfire, morphing into a modern-day legend. James was gone, facing a mountain of federal charges, and the Nakamura deal, now being renegotiated on fair terms, was a testament to Emma's renewed decisive leadership. But for Emma, the victory felt hollow. Mark Wilson had vanished. He had submitted his resignation via a brief professional email the day after the meeting. His final paycheck was never picked up. He hadn't answered the single text she'd sent, a simple, "Are you okay?" He had honored his side of the bargain to the letter. The contract was terminated. They were strangers again, and his absence had left a glaring, inexplicable hole in her world. She found herself looking for him in the hallways, listening for the squeak of his cart. Her building felt sterile again, a place of glass and steel without a soul. She had won back her company, but she'd lost the one person who had made her feel like a part of it. Finally, she understood. The problem wasn't just James. The problem was a culture she had created, a place so focused on the view from the top that it had forgotten the foundation it was built on. She called a company-wide town hall. Standing before her thousands of employees, she wasn't the ruthless, detached CEO they were used to. Her voice was different, softer, stronger. For the last 10 years, I've measured the success of this company by its stock price and its market share, she began. I was wrong. A company is not its balance sheet. A company is its people. She told them about a man who worked for them, a man with extraordinary skills who pushed a broom because no one had ever bothered to look past his uniform. How many more of you are there? She asked, her gaze sweeping across the crowd. How many artists, engineers, pilots, and poets are in this room right now? Your talent's hidden because we never thought to ask. That ends today. She announced the creation of a new division, the Department of Human Potential. Its sole purpose was to find and nurture the skills of every employee to provide education, training, and opportunities for advancement. It was a promise that at Harrison Aerospace, no one would ever be invisible again. There was only one person in the world who could run it. She found him on a Saturday in a small park a dozen blocks from his apartment. He was on his knees in a sandbox, helping Sophie put the finishing touches on an elaborate sandcastle. He looked up as she approached, his expression guarded. Miss Harrison, his voice flat. Emma, she corrected softly. You're a hard man to find, Mark. I'm not trying to be found. I know, she said, but I need your help. She told him about the new department, about her vision for a company that valued its people above all else. She offered him the job to lead it. He stood up, brushing the sand from his jeans, and shook his head. I'm not a manager, Emma. I'm nobody. You're not nobody, her voice fierce. You're the man who saved this company. You're the man who sees what other people miss. You told me your old job got people killed. I'm offering you a new mission, Mark, a job that brings people to life. He was still shaking his head, the fear of that old world pulling at him. But then Sophie, who had been listening with rapt attention, tugged on his sleeve. Daddy, her voice full of simple, unshakable logic. You fix the helicopter and you fix the sad lady's company. You're good at fixing things. Mark looked down at his daughter's bright, trusting face and then at Emma, who was watching them with an expression of raw, unguarded hope. He realized Sophie was right. Maybe a mission didn't have to involve a flight suit and an enemy. Maybe sometimes a mission was about building things up instead of tearing them down. A slow smile, the first truly relaxed smile she had ever seen from him, spread across his face. Okay, he said. Okay, I'll do it. 6 months had transformed the rooftop of Harrison Tower. The helipad remained functional, but now a carefully designed garden of potted plants in comfortable seating surrounded its perimeter. This space, once purely utilitarian, had become a gathering place where employees took breaks, held informal meetings, or simply enjoyed the spectacular view. It symbolized the broader changes sweeping through the company. Mark Wilson stood at the railing, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and deep purples. The director of human potential for 6 months now, he still found himself adjusting to the business attire that had replaced his maintenance uniform. His department had quickly become the company's unexpected success story, having already identified and promoted a dozen employees from within. The most notable was a former mailroom clerk who now led a design team that had just secured a major government contract. Behind him, the rooftop door opened. He recognized Emma's footsteps before he saw her, confident yet measured, the rhythm as familiar to him now as his own heartbeat. Emma joined him at the railing, maintaining the professional distance they preserved at work. In the months since the boardroom confrontation, they had developed a solid working relationship built on mutual respect and shared vision, but both had been careful about public displays of their evolving personal connection. Your quarterly report impressed the board today, Emma said, breaking their comfortable silence. Employee retention is up 28%, productivity has increased across all divisions, and we've had 3 patent applications filed by staff who were previously in non-creative roles. Mark nodded, allowing a small smile. It's not about the numbers, no. Emma agreed, it's about the people, but the board understands numbers, so I speak their language when necessary. The comment revealed how much she had changed. The Emma Harrison of a year ago would never have admitted that her approach to business was just one of many valid perspectives. How's Sophie? Emma asked, shifting to the personal with unusual ease. Mark's smile widened naturally. The trust is working perfectly. Her new pulmonologist says her lung function tests are the strongest they have ever been. She's talking about trying out for the swim team next year. Next year. The words hung between them, a future that stretched beyond the day-to-day survival that had defined his life for so long. And the new apartment, Emma knew he had recently moved to a larger place closer to Sophie's school, using part of his substantially increased salary. It's good. Sophie has her own room with actual closets. There's a small yard where she's planted a garden, tomatoes and marigolds. She checks on them every morning before school. Emma studied his face, noting how the perpetual tension around his eyes had eased. The haunted look that had shadowed him during their first encounters was gradually fading. Mark, I've been thinking. Her voice took on a more serious tone. The company helicopter has been sitting idle since our adventure. Gavin retired last month and I haven't replaced him. The board has been pushing me to sell it as an unnecessary expense. Mark stiffened slightly, uncertain where she was heading. I'd like you to consider becoming our official pilot. Not full-time, you'd still run your department. But for special trips, client meetings, emergencies. If you're interested. The offer hung in the air between them. She was asking him to reclaim the part of himself he had buried alongside his wife. I haven't flown since that night, Mark said quietly. I know, I'm not sure I can. Emma turned to face him directly. You once told me that flying gets people killed. I think what you really meant is that life gets people killed. Living fully, caring deeply, it's all a risk. But the alternative isn't really living at all, it's just existing. The words struck a chord deep within him. For 8 years he had been existing, not living, keeping his head down, focusing only on Sophie's needs and his invisible job. That night in the storm had awakened something he'd tried desperately to suppress. The feeling of being fully alive, of using every skill, every sense, every instinct to their fullest potential. I'll think about it, he said finally. Emma nodded, accepting his answer without pushing further. That was another change. Her newfound patience, her understanding that not every decision needed to be made immediately. I should go. Mark glanced at his watch. Sophie's waiting. Mrs. Gable can only stay until 6. Of course, Emma stepped back, maintaining their professional distance. Tell Sophie I said hello. Mark nodded and headed for the door, but paused with his hand on the handle. What about you? Any plans for the evening? Emma smiled ruefully. Just dinner with the Nakamura team. The merger documentation is finally ready. We sign tomorrow. Congratulations, Mark said sincerely. You fought hard for that deal. We fought hard for it, she corrected him. A moment of understanding passed between them, an acknowledgement of the journey they had shared. Then Mark was gone, the door closing quietly behind him. Emma remained on the rooftop, watching as the last rays of sunlight disappeared behind the city skyline. She thought about the changes of the past 6 months, not just in the company, but in herself. She had learned to value the human element of business, to see her employees as more than just cogs in a corporate machine. She had learned to trust, to delegate, to listen. And yet, there was still something missing. The victory felt incomplete. The next morning, the signing ceremony was held in Harrison Aerospace's main conference room. Representatives from Nakamura Corporation, including the CEO himself, had flown in for the occasion. The atmosphere was cordial, professional, worlds away from the desperate negotiations of 6 months ago. Emma led the proceedings with grace and authority, but her eyes kept drifting to the door. Mark had been invited as a key executive, but his chair remained empty as pens were passed and signatures collected on the thick stack of merger documents. Just as the final papers were being signed, the conference room door opened quietly. Mark slipped in, nodding apologetically for his lateness. Emma felt an unexpected surge of relief at his presence, as if some crucial element had been missing and was now restored. After the ceremony, as the executives mingled over champagne and canapes, Nakamura himself approached Mark. Mr. Wilson, the elderly Japanese businessman, bowed slightly. I understand you were instrumental in saving this merger. Mark looked uncomfortable with the recognition. I just flew the helicopter. Nakamura smiled knowingly. Sometimes the most important contribution is getting the right people to the right place at the right time. And sometimes a storm shows us what truly matters. Mark glanced across the room at Emma, who was deep in conversation with Arthur and several board members. She caught his eye briefly and smiled. Yes, sir. Sometimes it does. Later that afternoon, Mark sat in his office reviewing applications for the company's new educational assistance program. His department had identified dozens of employees with untapped potential who needed additional training or education to advance. The board had approved a substantial budget for scholarships and tuition reimbursement, another sign of the company's shifting priorities. Rachel, his assistant, knocked on his open door. Your 3:30 is here, she said. Mark looked up, puzzled. He didn't recall having a meeting scheduled. Sophie burst past Rachel and into the office. Surprised Daddy Mark's confusion turned to delight as he stood to embrace his daughter. Behind her stood Emma's executive assistant, smiling apologetically. "Ms. Harrison arranged for me to pick her up from school," the assistant explained. "She thought Sophie might enjoy seeing your office." Before Mark could respond, Sophie was already exploring the space, examining the certificates on the wall, the model helicopter on his desk, the view from his window. This was a part of his new life he hadn't yet shared with her. "Your office is bigger than our whole apartment used to be," Sophie observed with a child's blunt honesty. Mark laughed. "Not quite Firefly, but it is pretty big." As Sophie continued her exploration, Mark sent Emma a quick text. "Thank you for arranging Sophie's visit." The response came almost immediately. "She should see where her father is changing the world." The simple message warmed something in Mark's chest. It was the first time anyone had acknowledged the importance of his work, not just to the company, but to Sophie. He wanted her to be proud of him, to understand that there was more to him than the quiet, cautious father who checked her homework and made her dinner. Sophie's visit stretched into the evening. Mark showed her around the department, introducing her to his team, letting her sit in his chair and pretend to be the boss. She charmed everyone she met with her curious questions and unfiltered observations. They were heading toward the elevator when Emma stepped out of a meeting room down the hall. Sophie immediately ran to her, showing none of the hesitation that adults felt around the CEO. "Ms. Emma, did you send me to Daddy's office? It's the best office ever. He has a whole team of people who find hidden talents, just like in my favorite book where the kids discover they have secret powers." Emma crouched down to Sophie's level, something Mark had never seen her do before. "I did send you. I thought you might want to see all the important work your dad is doing. He's helping people find their superpowers," Sophie stated with absolute conviction. Emma glanced up at Mark, her eyes twinkling with amusement. "That's exactly what he's doing." As they rode the elevator down together, Sophie chattering excitedly about everything she had seen, Mark studied Emma's profile. She was different with Sophie, softer, more open, less guarded. It was yet another facet of the complex woman he was slowly coming to know. In the lobby, as they prepared to part ways, Sophie surprised them both by taking Emma's hand. "You should come have dinner with us sometime. Daddy makes really good tacos on Thursdays." Mark started to intervene to explain that Ms. Harrison was very busy, but Emma spoke first. "I would like that very much, Sophie, if it's okay with your dad." 3 pairs of eyes met. Sophie's hopeful. Emma's questioning, Mark's uncertain. He hesitated only briefly before nodding. "Thursday it is." Thursday arrived with unexpected nervousness on Mark's part. He found himself cleaning the already clean apartment, rearranging furniture, changing his shirt twice. Sophie watched his unusual behavior with amused curiosity. "Daddy, why are you acting weird? It's just Ms. Emma coming for tacos." Mark paused in the middle of adjusting a picture frame for the 3rd time. "I'm not acting weird." Sophie gave him a look of pure disbelief. "You cleaned the bathroom twice and you're wearing your Christmas shirt." Mark glanced down at the button-up shirt he had indeed received last Christmas, but had never worn. "Is it too much?" Sophie shrugged with the casual wisdom of childhood. "Ms. Emma likes you anyway. She doesn't care about shirts." Before Mark could process that statement, the doorbell rang. Sophie raced to answer it while Mark took a deep breath, trying to calm the unexpected flutter in his chest. Emma stood in the doorway, noticeably different from her corporate persona. Gone was the power suit, replaced by jeans and a simple blouse. Her hair was loose around her shoulders, rather than in its usual severe style. She looked younger, more approachable, almost vulnerable. She held out a small pot containing a flowering plant. "I wasn't sure what to bring. Sophie mentioned she likes gardening." Sophie's face lit up as she accepted the gift. "It's a cyclamen. They're hard to grow." She turned to Mark. "Can I put it in my garden right now?" Mark nodded, watching as his daughter carefully carried the plant to their small backyard. Emma's thoughtfulness shouldn't have surprised him, but it did. She had remembered a casual mention of Sophie's hobby and had chosen a gift that would delight her. The evening unfolded with unexpected ease. They prepared tacos together, Sophie taking charge of the assembly line, assigning tasks with the authority of a seasoned kitchen manager. Emma accepted her role as cheese distributor with good humor, following Sophie's exacting instructions. Over dinner, conversation flowed naturally. Sophie dominated much of the discussion, sharing stories from school and describing her garden in meticulous detail. Mark watched the interaction with growing amazement. Emma listened to Sophie with genuine interest, asking questions that showed she was truly engaged, not just humoring a child. After Sophie went to bed, Mark and Emma sat in the small living room, glasses of wine in hand. The professional distance that defined their relationship at work had dissolved in the warmth of the evening. "She's extraordinary," Emma said softly. "So bright, so resilient. She's everything," Mark replied simply. A comfortable silence settled between them, broken only when Emma noticed the framed photo on the side table, the one of Mark and his late wife. "She was beautiful," Emma observed. "Sophie has her smile." Mark nodded, a familiar ache in his chest, but it was different now. Less raw, more bittersweet. "Sarah would have loved you," he said, surprising himself with the admission. Emma looked at him questioningly. She valued authenticity above all else. She could spot a fake from a mile away. "She would have appreciated your directness, your refusal to sugarcoat things." The conversation shifted to safer ground. Work projects, the success of the department, plans for expansion. But something had changed between them. A door opened that couldn't be closed again. As Emma prepared to leave, Mark walked her to the door. "Thank you for coming. Sophie loved having you here." "And you?" Emma asked directly. Mark hesitated, then decided on honesty. "I did too. It's been a long time since this place felt like more than just an apartment." Emma held his gaze for a long moment. "Thank you for letting me in," she said finally, and they both knew she meant more than just into his home. The following weeks brought a new rhythm to their relationship. Emma began joining them for dinner regularly. She and Sophie developed their own traditions, a secret handshake, inside jokes, a shared love of puzzles. Mark watched their bond grow with a mixture of joy and apprehension. Sophie was opening her heart to Emma, and he feared what would happen if things didn't work out. At work, they maintained their professional relationship, but subtle changes were evident to those who looked closely. The way Emma's expression softened when Mark entered a room, the way he anticipated her needs before she expressed them, the lingering glances when they thought no one was watching. The company continued to thrive under their combined leadership. Emma's vision and Mark's insight into the human element created a powerful synergy that transformed Harrison Aerospace from a traditional corporate hierarchy into a model of employee empowerment. Trade publications began writing about the Harrison method, and competitors scrambled to replicate their success. One evening in late autumn, Mark stood in his office, staring at an email from the company's IT director. The message concerned an upgrade to the security protocols that Mark had suggested based on his experience in the military. Few people at Harrison knew that in addition to being a pararescue specialist and pilot, he had also served as his unit's cybersecurity liaison. That experience had been crucial in understanding and exploiting James's hidden network months ago. Mark's computer pinged with a calendar notification, Sophie's next pulmonologist appointment. Opening the attached report from her last visit, he felt a surge of emotion at the dramatic improvement in her test results. The trust fund Emma had established was providing access to treatments that would have been impossible on a janitor's salary. A knock at his door interrupted his thoughts. Emma stood in the doorway holding a folder. "Got a minute?" she asked, closing the door behind her. "For you always." She placed the folder on his desk and sat down across from him. "I need your input on something." Mark opened the folder to find architectural plans for the top 3 floors of Harrison Tower. The drawings showed a complete redesign: residential spaces, common areas, gardens. "What's this?" he asked, studying the detailed renderings. Emma leaned forward, an uncharacteristic hint of uncertainty in her expression. "I'm thinking of converting the top 3 floors into executive living spaces for key personnel who need to be close to the office." Mark flipped through the pages, noting the detailed specifications for each apartment. "And this?" he asked, pointing to the plans for the entire top floor. "A spacious penthouse with panoramic views and a private access to the helipad." Emma's cheeks colored slightly. "That would be for us. If you wanted it, it would be closer to Sophie's school than your current place, and you wouldn't have to commute across town." She was rambling, a rare departure from her usual precise communication. "It's just an idea. We don't have to decide anything now." Mark studied her face, touched by this evidence that his opinion mattered so deeply to her. The formidable Emma Harrison, who made billion-dollar decisions without breaking a sweat, was nervous about his reaction to her plans for their future. He reached across the desk and took her hand. "It looks perfect. like home. Relief and joy swept across her face. She had been afraid he wouldn't want to live in the building where he had once worked as a janitor, that it would be a constant reminder of their different backgrounds. Instead, he saw it as coming full circle, returning to the place where their story had begun, but as equals this time. As autumn deepened toward winter, Mark found himself spending more time on the helipad. He hadn't yet accepted Emma's offer to become the company's official pilot, but he was drawn to the Bell 429 like a moth to flame. Sometimes he would just sit in the cockpit, hands resting lightly on the controls, feeling the ghost of muscle memory. One crisp November morning, he arrived to find Emma already there watching the sunrise over the city skyline. "Checking up on me?" he asked, joining her by the helicopter. She shook her head. "Just enjoying the view. It's different up here at dawn." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the city wake below them. After a while, Emma spoke without looking at him. "I've been thinking about our first flight together. How terrified I was and how calm you were." "I wasn't calm on the inside," Mark admitted. "I was terrified too, just in a different way." "What were you afraid of?" Mark considered the question. "Not the storm, not the flying. I was afraid of feeling alive again, because for 8 years feeling nothing had been safer." Emma turned to face him. "And now I'm scared of how much I want to live again." He glanced at the helicopter. "I've been doing some research. There's a children's hospital upstate that needs volunteer pilots for their Angel Flight program. Medical transports for kids who live in remote areas." Emma's eyes widened slightly. "You're thinking of volunteering?" Mark nodded. "Not right away, but eventually. It feels right, using these skills to help children not to drop into combat zones. I think that's wonderful," Emma said softly. Mark took a deep breath. "But first I want to take Sophie flying. A real flight, not just a demonstration. I want her to understand that part of me." Emma smiled. "When?" "This weekend, if the weather holds. And I was hoping you'd come with us." Her smile widened. "I wouldn't miss it for the world." The day of the flight dawned clear and perfect. Mark arrived at the helipad early, performing a meticulous pre-flight check of the helicopter. It was the same Bell 429 he had flown that stormy night, but today it represented something different. Not desperation or duty, but possibility. Emma arrived with Sophie, who was practically bouncing with excitement. Mark had never seen his daughter so animated. She was wearing a flight jacket that matched his own, a gift from Emma that brought a lump to his throat when he saw it. "Are you ready?" Firefly and Mark helped Sophie with her safety harness, making sure it was properly secured. Sophie nodded enthusiastically. "Will we go super high? Can we see our house from the sky? All the way to the clouds," Mark promised. Emma took the co-pilot's seat just as she had that night, but the atmosphere couldn't have been more different. There was no storm, no crisis, no desperation. Just three people about to share an experience that meant something different to each of them. The takeoff was smooth and gentle, Mark handling the controls with the same expertise, but none of the intensity of their previous flight. Sophie gasped in delight as the helicopter rose above the city, her eyes wide with wonder as familiar landmarks transformed from ground level into a spectacular aerial view. "Look, Daddy, our apartment is so tiny, and my school, and there's the park where we built the sandcastle." Mark pointed out various landmarks, explaining how the helicopter worked, showing Sophie the basic principles of flight in terms she could understand. Emma watched their interactions, seeing yet another side of Mark, the natural teacher sharing his passion with his daughter. They flew over the city and out toward the countryside, the urban landscape giving way to rolling hills and forests. Mark pointed out a lake that glittered in the sunlight like a mirror. "Can we go down there?" Sophie asked, pressing her face against the window. Mark looked at Emma, who nodded encouragingly. "Why not?" He brought the helicopter down, finding a clear area near the lake shore where they could land safely. As the rotor slowed, Sophie unbuckled her harness, eager to explore. The three of them walked along the lake shore, Sophie running ahead to collect interesting stones and leaves, while Mark and Emma followed at a more sedate pace. "She's never seen me fly before today," Mark said quietly. "Sarah and I agreed to keep our work separate from home life. Sophie was too young to understand what we did, the risks involved. After Sarah died, I just continued that separation. It became a wall between who I was and who I am." Emma listened, and understanding the significance of what was happening. "You're bringing those parts of yourself back together." Mark nodded, watching Sophie skip stones across the lake's surface. I've been compartmentalizing for so long, I forgot how to be whole. They stood in comfortable silence, watching Sophie's exploration. After a while, she ran back to them, her hands full of treasures. Smooth stones, an unusual feather, a perfect pine cone. Can we take these home? Sophie looked up at Mark hopefully. Of course, Firefly. Emma smiled at the exchange, but Sophie surprised them both by turning to her next. And can we come back here sometime? All three of us, the question hung in the air, loaded with meaning beyond a simple request for another outing. Sophie was asking for continuity, for Emma to be a part of their future adventures, for the three of them to become something more permanent than CEO, employee, and child. Mark held his breath, afraid to look at Emma, afraid to see hesitation or discomfort on her face. Instead, when he finally gathered the courage to turn toward her, he saw something unexpected. Certainty. I would like that very much, Emma said, her voice steady and sure. Sophie, satisfied with this answer, returned to her exploration, leaving the adults to process the moment that had just passed between them. That night, after Sophie was asleep, Mark and Emma sat on his small back porch, the events of the day still resonating between them. Thank you for today, Mark said quietly. For all of it. The helicopter, the jacket, for Sophie being there for her first flight. Emma smiled in the darkness. It was my pleasure. She's an amazing child. Another comfortable silence fell between them, but this one was charged with unspoken thoughts and possibilities. Mark, Emma finally broke the silence. When I first met you, I saw you as a puzzle to solve, then as an asset to use, then as an ally against James. Her voice softened. I never expected to find a friend, and I certainly never expected. She trailed off, uncharacteristically hesitant. Mark turned to face her, finding courage he didn't know he possessed. You never expected to find a family? Emma's breath caught. Is that what we're becoming? I think that's what Sophie already sees. Mark took Emma's hand, his fingers intertwining with hers. The question is, what do you see? Emma's answer was direct, in keeping with her nature. I see a chance to build something real. Something that matters more than corporate mergers or stock prices or board approval. But I need to know if you're ready for that. If you've made room in your heart for something new. The question hung between them, the most important one either of them had faced in years. Mark thought of Sarah, of the photo that still sat on his side table, of the grief that had shaped his existence for 9 long years. He thought of Emma, of her strength and vulnerability, of how she had transformed not just the company, but his own understanding of what was possible. Sarah will always be part of me, part of Sophie, he said slowly. But I've been holding on to grief for so long that I forgot how to hold on to joy. Today, watching you with Sophie flying together, it felt right. It felt like family. Emma's eyes shimmered in the dim light of the porch. I've never had a real family, she admitted. My father was brilliant, driven, but distant. My mother left when I was young. I built a company, but never a home. Until now. Until you and Sophie showed me what I was missing. Mark reached up gently, brushing a strand of hair from her face. The gesture was tender, tentative, full of possibility. Emma leaned forward, closing the distance between them. Their first kiss was gentle, a question and an answer wrapped into one. When they pulled apart, both were smiling. Not the guarded smile of professional colleagues or the polite smile of casual acquaintances, but the genuine smile of two people who had found something unexpected and precious. 3 months later, Mark stood in his new office on the 51st floor of Harrison Tower, overlooking the city he had once cleaned. The construction on the residential floors was proceeding on schedule, with the executive apartments expected to be ready by spring. His and Emma's penthouse would take a bit longer, but the architectural details they had selected together made the wait worthwhile. On his desk sat a framed photo of Sophie in her flyweight jacket, standing proudly next to the Bell 429. Beside it was his new pilot's license, reinstated after he had completed the refresher course Emma had encouraged him to take. He was now officially the corporate pilot for special occasions and had already signed up for training with the Children's Hospital Angel Flight Program. His computer chimed with a video call, Sophie checking in from her school's science fair. Emma had taken the afternoon off to attend a practice that would have been unthinkable a year ago. Their faces appeared on the screen, both beaming with excitement. We won first place, Sophie exclaimed, holding up a blue ribbon. My volcano was the best one. Congratulations, Firefly. Mark felt a surge of pride, not just for Sophie's achievement, but for how natural it seemed to see her and Emma together, a family unit that had formed almost without him noticing. Tell Daddy what the judges said, Emma prompted, her arm around Sophie's shoulders. They said my design showed exceptional understanding of pressure systems and explosive force, Sophie recited proudly. And that my hypothesis was very well tested, Mark laughed. Very scientific. Miss Emma helped me with the technical terms, Sophie admitted. But I did all the baking soda calculations myself. After the call ended, Mark returned to the proposal he had been working on. An expansion of the Human Potential Program to include paid sabbaticals for employees to develop passion projects. The board had been skeptical at first, but the success of the department's previous initiatives had earned him substantial credibility. A knock at his door interrupted his thoughts. Emma stood in the doorway, her expression unusually serious. "You're back early," Mark observed. "Is everything okay with Sophie?" "She's fine. I dropped her at her friend Mia's house for a play date." Emma closed the door behind her. "But I needed to talk to you about something important." Mark felt a flicker of concern. "What's wrong?" Emma sat on the edge of his desk. "Nothing's wrong, but I need your input on a decision." She placed a small box on the desk between them. Mark stared at it, understanding immediately what it contained. "I was going to wait," Emma said, uncharacteristically nervous. "I had this elaborate plan, dinner at that restaurant overlooking the harbor, the whole romantic setup. But then today, watching Sophie with her science project, something clicked. She knew exactly what she wanted to do, and she just did it. No hesitation, no overthinking." Mark picked up the box, but didn't open it. "You're taking life advice from an 8-year-old now." Emma smiled. "Sometimes children see things more clearly than we do. I want this, Mark. I want us. You, me, Sophie. A family. A life together." Mark opened the box to reveal a simple platinum band. It wasn't what he had expected. No diamond, no flashy stone. Just a clean, elegant circle of metal. Reading his expression, Emma explained, "I thought a traditional engagement ring might not be your style. This seemed more you." Mark slipped the ring onto his finger. It fit perfectly. "How did you know my size? I have my resources," Emma said with a mysterious smile. "So, what do you say?" Mark stood and pulled her to her feet. "I say you beat me to it." He reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a small velvet box of his own. Inside was a diamond ring, elegant but not ostentatious, exactly Emma's style. Her eyes widened in surprise. "You were going to—" Mark nodded. "I was planning to ask you next weekend after Sophie's recital. I even practiced what I was going to say." "Tell me," Emma said softly. Mark took her hand. "Emma Harrison, you challenged me, trusted me, fought beside me, and helped me find my way back to life. You've become part of my family, part of my heart. Will you marry me?" Emma slipped the ring onto her finger, then reached up to touch his face. "Yes," she said simply. 1,000 times yes." Later that evening, they picked up Sophie from her playdate and took her to dinner to share their news. Her reaction was one of complete satisfaction rather than surprise. Finally, she declared, "I've been waiting forever." Mark exchanged an amused look with Emma. "Forever? We've only known Emma for a year, Firefly." Sophie rolled her eyes with the dramatic flair only children can achieve. "That's practically forever, Daddy." As they drove home, Sophie between them in the backseat of Emma's car, Mark watched the city lights blur past the window. A year ago, he had been invisible, a ghost in his own life moving through the world without leaving an impression. Now he was seen, known, valued, not just for his skills, but for who he was. The car pulled up to the apartment building that would soon no longer be their home. Sophie, tired from her exciting day, leaned against his shoulder as they rode the elevator up. "When do we move to the tower?" she asked through a yawn. "Not for a few more months," Emma answered. "The construction team needs to finish our new home first." Sophie nodded, satisfied. "I already told my teacher I'm moving. I said we're going to live in the clouds, in the same building where Daddy and Ms. Emma work." The simple way she phrased it, "where Daddy and Mrs. Emma work," struck Mark with unexpected force. To Sophie, there was no distinction between the janitor he had been and the executive he had become. Both were just her father doing what fathers do. Later, after Sophie was asleep, Mark and Emma stood at the kitchen window, looking out at the distant silhouette of Harrison Tower illuminated against the night sky. "It's strange," Mark said quietly. A year ago, I was pushing a mop in that building, hiding from life. Now we're going to live at the top of it. Do you ever miss it? Emma asked. The simplicity of that life, Mark considered the question. Sometimes. There was a certain peace in invisibility and expecting nothing. But it wasn't really living. It was just existing. Emma leaned against him, her head on his shoulder. You know, when I made that ridiculous bet on the helipad, I never imagined we'd end up here. Mark smiled. If you can fly this helicopter, I'll marry you. Who knew you were actually serious? Emma laughed softly. Life rarely takes us where we expect. Sometimes we have to fly through a storm to find clear skies. The helicopter banked gently as they approached the city, the lights below beginning to twinkle on in the gathering dusk. The Harrison Tower stood tallest among them, a beacon guiding them home. I used to think power was about control, Emma mused, about never showing weakness, never admitting doubt, never trusting anyone else to take the controls. And now Mark asked, already knowing the answer, but wanting to hear her say it. Emma reached across the space between them, resting her hand on his arm. Now I know that real strength comes from knowing when to let go, when to trust someone else to fly the plane. Mark covered her hand with his own, the simple contact conveying more than words ever could. The helicopter continued its smooth journey toward the helipad where their story had begun. A journey not just across physical space, but across the vast distance between isolation and connection, between fear and trust, between merely surviving and truly living. As the skids touched down on the rooftop of Harrison Tower, Mark powered down the engine, the rotor blades gradually slowing above them. The sudden silence was profound, broken only by Sophie's soft breathing from the back seat as she continued to sleep exhausted from their day of adventure. Are we home? Sophie asked sleepily, opening her eyes. Mark and Emma exchanged a look filled with a shared understanding. Yes, Firefly. Mark answered, his voice rich with meaning beyond the simple response. We're home.